the key, I think, to transformation when it comes to this kind of issue is that there's always change available. No matter what kind of situation, and something can be different. It's just that when we're looking at our scenario, often we don't see where those changes are available to us. Someone hasn't presented them, we aren't aware of what they could be, and so it feels hopeless. But that's where I think the value of relationships, multiple other perspectives, it's like, that's where you can start to acquire hope from other people's perspectives. What they see in you. Like a beautiful way what Shoyo and Shoko do for each other is to see each other in the way that they need to see themselves. The ability to see one another from that lens to give each other some hope.
But before we dive into it, guys, we wanted to let you know this video is brought to you by us.
Yes, us and our new Patreon that we just launched.
Basically, we wanted to create a place where our entire catalog of videos is ad-free, and it also doesn't include some of the changes that we need to make to satisfy YouTube. We have to cut out a lot of stuff. You wouldn't believe how much we have to cut out.
We are super excited to be starting a place where we can build this community to have these deeper discussions around psychology and film, not just in the comments, but in Discord and other places like that. We're also really excited for, in the future, getting the chance to actually get you guys more involved in the creation process of this video. We're really stoked about that.
And on top of it all, it's just a way that you guys can support us and help us to make this our full-time job, which it's slowly becoming.
Yep.
You can check it out at the link in the description below, but for right now, let's just get right back into A Silent Voice. Welcome everybody back to Frame of Mind, where psychology and filmmaking meet at the intersection of storytelling. My name is Jordan, I'm a video editor.
My name's Curtis, I'm a psychotherapist.
Curtis, I don't think I've ever been more excited to record an episode, and also as afraid at the same time.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm not the only one, though.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about A Silent Voice. This is a film that came out in 2016, won a whole bunch of awards, was nominated for even more, and I didn't know it existed until last month. And so I watched it, and it quickly became one of my top 5 films of all time.
Yeah, it's something that really goes over some really important, ideas is way too small of a way to say it, like, some critical pieces of human experience get explored in this movie. Yeah. And that's part of what makes it wonderful. At the same time, that's also what makes it potentially very heavy. Yeah. Like, I know for people, that can be overwhelming a little bit.
Yeah, overwhelming is a good way to put it. It's going to be talking about some subject matter that's pretty intense. So we wanted to have a little bit of a disclaimer right now that we're going to be talking about some subject matter that might be concerning or overwhelming for some people. So there's concepts about harming oneself, self-deletion, and we're going to be using terms like that throughout the course of the episode, not because we don't want to use the actual terms, but because we want to have this conversation with you in a way that YouTube's not going to prevent us from having this conversation.
Yeah. This is really all done in the effort to make sure that we get exposure to this topic, not so that we are avoiding using certain terms because they're bad or they're scary or anything like that.
Yeah, and in line with that, if you are concerned that this set of topics might be a little bit overwhelming for you, feel free not to watch it. Like, that's okay. If you feel like you maybe need to come back to it with a bit of a different mindset, or you're not ready, or there's
watch it with somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be afraid not to watch this episode. We won't be offended.
Absolutely.
The other thing is that if you feel like at any point during this episode, or just like in life in general, you might be in need of some help with some of the topics that are going on in this video, we've left a couple of links to resources in the description below. We really hope that nobody's going through situations like this, but like
inevitably people do.
We're not naive. It's a big part of the human experience right now. And so we wanted to make sure that if you're feeling any way in relation to the way some of these characters are feeling in this film, there's some resources down below that hopefully can maybe give you a little bit of a helping hand.
Yeah. And my hope is that through the conversation we're going to have today, by the end of the video, you'll feel exactly that.
Yeah.
Because it's important to know that you're not alone. You're not the only person. And it is super critical, as cliche as it might sound, like it is important to reach out to help, because as much as you might experience people in your life who in your immediate circle or in your immediate space may not seem like they are concerned, considerate, or caring, that doesn't mean that everybody in the world is. And sometimes it's simply a matter of finding a way to reach out to the right people who are going to be there to support. And so we'll try to leave as many resources in the description as we can about places where you can get that support.
I don't think I've ever been... It's going to start happening right now. I'm going to start crying right away. Beautiful. I don't think I've ever been moved so quickly by a musical score.
It is one of the most amazing, like, there is something about the music in this film that is like so perfectly attuned to the mood.
Yeah.
Like, it's not overwhelming. It's not something that stands out. It really is something that feels like it carries the narrative through in a subtle way. Beautifully, I think, transfers the feeling that you want. And this is one of the things that I think about when we think about music. In a lot of ways, it's one of these vehicles that helps communicate the feeling that we are supposed to be feeling in the moment.
Yeah.
If you
Emotional clarity.
Exactly. If you can't tell how you're supposed to be feeling in this scene, here is the beat that gives you the clarity for how you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
And it feels like this film does that just for 2 hours. The music is so good at, I think, bringing us into both Shoko and Shoya's experiences in very different ways. Mm-hmm. The tinnitus, the ringing pieces, the imperfections, the quality of it, the subtleness and the quietness to it. Like, yeah, it's beautiful. Maybe one interesting note before we start this thing.
Yeah.
The two different titles, The Shape of Voice and A Silent Voice.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on that?
My understanding is that, I might be wrong on this, so please correct me if I'm wrong. A Silent Voice is the English translation. And
one of the English translations.
Yeah, and A Shape of Voice is maybe more accurate to the literal interpretation of what it means in Japanese.
Yeah.
The whole idea is that it's... Woo! All right!
Oh, you're going to get me started.
This is so difficult.
No, you're going to get me started. Oh, man.
It's the impact of your actions speaks louder than words. Like it's not the actual literal theme that I think the title is going for, but that's the vibe. That's the idea.
Yep.
It's like, what are the ripple effects of your actions on the rest of the world, even if you literally can't hear?
Yeah. I like both of them for different reasons, because both of them appear to be a reference to sign language.
Yes.
And so I love how in both ways, all these movements are in a way, they don't communicate anything auditorily, but it's a silent way of communicating.
And it's a shape.
Exactly. And so it really is, I feel like it's tomato, whatever you want. They both are beautiful and doing it in their own way. A silent voice might be a little bit more, it feels like the one that's caught on because it might flow a little bit better. There's a piece though, when you talk about the more thematic elements kind of under the surface, where I really like the idea of that title being a reference to one of the themes that runs through the whole show about like, how are people communicating with one another and reaching one another?
Yeah.
Because there's an element of this where the sign language really is only a surface level vehicle that in Shoko's experience, it's maybe the most obvious thing that kind of drives most of the narrative forward. But on the side of that, in the periphery, there's so many other characters who are all going through their own challenges around how do I communicate and be understood by other people? And it's amazing to me how I'm sure we'll dive into it, but like there are the things that we say and then there are the things that we mean. And it seems like so often the things that we say are not actually accurate representations, and whatever the truth is that we mean is silent. And it's like, if only we could communicate that with other people, I feel like the clarity that would bring to our relationships would be dramatic in that maybe it changes every single interaction that happens in this film.
今までお世話になりました。
全部で3万くらいっすね。
It starts out fast, really fast.
Yeah. Although it's ironic that it doesn't feel like it's quickly paced.
No.
It feels like it's slow enough where you can grasp everything that's happening, where it hits the key moments of all the days where it's happening, each action that Shoya's doing.
Mm-hmm. My girlfriend is actually a teacher at a film school, and she has a lot of students who just actually submitted recently their short films.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she talks about that comes up over and over and over again is the fact that everything takes so long.
Yeah.
I think there's this misinterpretation when it comes to filmmaking that to make a scene more emotional, you have to let it breathe longer.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is a perfect illustration of the fact that you can convey a lot of information and a lot of emotion very quickly.
It's just the poignancy of the moments that you pick.
Yes. I think that's also, we'll probably get into this too, is I think that's a really strong benefit of this being an animated film, is that you put so much more care into every single shot.
Yeah.
Because it's not something where you can just pick it up and like, okay, we'll quickly film this and it'll be easier. It's like, no, you have to draw Every single piece of this, everything is thought out. Every line, every frame has intention behind it.
Like, it really drives it home, but it does condense this into like a 1 minute
Less
of all the information that we need to know to contextualize him on the bridge.
Yeah.
There's something that I think is done really well by the filmmakers here, in that this first like 10 minutes might have been the most difficult part of the movie for me. Like, it was a grind to get through all these scenes of the interactions they had in grade school because of how much it hurt.
Yeah.
But there's something that I think the filmmakers did that was awesome, was giving us the present day context for Shoya first.
Yes.
Because now, with that primer of where he ends up, now getting the backstory, my approach or my position towards Shoya is not, oh my goodness, I hate this kid. It's actually trying really hard to empathize with him.
Yeah.
Because I know what's going to happen next, and I know the pain that he's going to experience.
Yeah.
And so kind of leading up, the filmmakers probably don't want us to dislike Shoya. They want us to understand and empathize him. And depending on how you construct the way that your scenes are ordered, that could have a really big impact on how we as the audience feel about him.
Yeah. There's a difference between disliking a character and disliking what they're doing.
Yep.
The order that you do things in really does matter.
Yep.
One thing that I notice here it's really powerful how they establish the theme really early on is everybody. I'm not going to get through this episode.
It might take 4 hours, but we'll do it.
Everybody's reaching out for connection.
Yeah.
That's the film.
Yep.
That's it. That's what everybody's going to be doing for the rest of the film.
Yep. Part of what really struck me in this movie was like the framing of how do kids experience new and uncertain pieces of information? Like, how do they process new experiences?
Yeah.
In that very initial scene where Shoko's introducing herself, nothing bad has happened yet. There aren't any negative interactions. There is surprise, shock, which is perfectly reasonable because even though this is 6th grade, like it makes total sense that most of these kids have never interacted with somebody who is deaf before.
Yeah.
And so there's a really important piece here where these kids don't have a context or a framework for this new thing. And so without guidance, that is going to get slotted into whatever their default way of navigating the world is. And there's a lot of places where I think we'll watch this and see where that creates problems. And it is where, out of any one who is here, like the adults piss me off more than anything.
Yeah.
We'll get to the teacher in a second. I'm sure by the end of this part of the story, I'm going to rip into him.
Yeah.
It's like so many problems, but like, it's good to know these kids are coming at this with, they don't know how to navigate this. They need help and support. And then it's almost like a little bit of Lord of the Flies. What happens when you leave kids to their own devices? Things go along predetermined tracks. And we'll kind of see where these tracks show up. The last couple scenes have given really good context for something to know about Shoya and what he's dealing with here. So what we've watched so far has not been any bullying from Shoya yet. What he's been doing is he's been watching and observing the ways that Shoko is interacting with the other students and the impact that it's having, right? So he sees like, oh, this is something where it's kind of causing Ueno some inconvenience because now she's got to take notes and then she can't do her own stuff. And then there's, oh, we're not going to win the choir competition. Like, he's taking this information in before he does anything. And so it kind of gives you that idea of like, okay, where is he going to contextualize Shoko in this experience?
Yeah.
it's probably going to be, oh, this is somebody who has a negative impact on the group that we're in.
Yeah.
Because there isn't that space for, well, how are you supposed to treat people who are like that? Are you supposed to be supportive? Are you supposed to be understanding? Are you supposed to try to do your best to help integrate them into your community and make some changes and adjustments rather than forcing them to adjust to you? Like, that's not always the way that things should go. There are points in time where each one of those approaches is going to be valuable. And in this case, like, it feels kind of like by default or obvious to us that obviously you should try to make some accommodations for Shoko. But he doesn't understand how to do that. And then you look at the ways that he's interacting with his friends, like roughhousing like crazy. That's the way that he engages with his world. And so you put these two pieces of the puzzle together, the behavior kind of becomes predictable.
だよ気持ち悪い
It's not that it makes it any easier to watch. It just kind of makes you wish that somebody with a little bit more wisdom and knowledge would have had some ability to see where Shoya was at and have some input and start to course correct things when these things happened.
Yeah. I think too, it's an example of, like, it's not even for kids, like even as adults, it's way easier to see and emulate than it is to think through and do something different.
Yeah.
So of course he's going to see the way that other people treat him. Like even the example of the teacher really didn't look out for Shoko at all.
No.
And not to say that Shoya is like seeing that and being like, oh, I'm going to do the same thing, but kids replicate. We replicate. Like we see the way people do things, and sometimes unconsciously we just do the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. It's like there's so many things about when you're looking at a kid's behaviors, if you're doing counseling or trying to work with a family on something, where it's like, my professor had this saying, like, nothing shows up on the sidewalk out of nowhere. Nothing just kind of apparates into existence. Everything is emergent from something else. And so there's a pathway to follow, a way that things go. And the value of that is that pathway can be changed at some point if there's observation and intervention. But if there's not, things just kind of plow through the way that they're going to go.
Yeah.
え西宮さん大丈夫どうしよう西宮さんお前やりすぎ
I think this was probably the hardest
Yep.
piece of this to watch.
Yeah. Brutal. And I like when we're talking about intervention points, like, this is the moment. If there's ever a moment, it's like, hey, this should be taken really seriously. I don't know if the manga that it's based on, they have any of these components where there is intervention, but Shoya kind of pushes through it anyways. But for the way that the story is told in this context, we see no feedback or pushback to direct Shoya in a different direction.
何どいて邪魔この人何やってんの帰ろうぜ
I think one thing that this film does really, really well is that it showcases Shoko in a way where you immediately empathize with her and realize that she's got the best heart out of anybody.
Oh, like,
but
so much.
But she's also got flaws. Her flaw is naivety, that she takes everything onto herself.
Yeah.
She's apologizing for the bullying that other people are doing to her.
Which is crazy to think about that as a flaw.
Yeah. Well, so it's not a flaw in the sense of like, you're a bad person for this. It's a flaw in the sense is this is something that's going to negatively impact you for the rest of your life unless it's dealt with.
Yeah.
And it's not her fault for this happening. Like, this is probably a result of the world that she was brought into because she's deaf, because of the way that other people have treated her. So it's not putting that, like, it's not
Just
saying,
like Shoya, she's on a trajectory of behavior
Yeah.
based on what she's experienced.
it's not saying that she should be different. It's saying that she needs to be different for herself.
And maybe that's actually a great way to, like, recontextualize the idea of flaw. Because I think when you're talking about that, lots of people will think about it in a narrative way. We talk about characters' flaws, and we'll think about things that are wrong with the characters or things that they do badly.
Exaggerated
You're a bad
sense.
person for having this flaw, which, I mean, maybe if we think about even one of the huge themes of the movie, like, this whole movie is saying that that's not the case. Like, you're not a bad person because of your flaws.
You're not even a bad person because you're a bully.
Exactly. But maybe when we think about a flaw from a narrative perspective, we can think about it like the sets of behaviors that create repeating negative cycles. Like the thing that keeps me on that pathway that just goes over and over and over again and keeps negative experiences in my life on repeat. When we have two characters who come together, I think a lot of the time the flaws kind of orbit one another and create this like feedback loop of expanding negativity and chaos. So you think about, and this is classic actually when we think about ways that people triangulate or stabilize in their relationships, like Shoya as the person who really lacks empathy. He can't see things from another person's perspective. He isn't kind or considerate or caring about them. We would have that be the different terms we could use for it, but we would call that almost like the blamer or the bully or whatever that is. Those people have a tendency to get into these behavioral loops with people who we would call the placator, which would be more of where Shoko was like, I'm always sorry. It's my fault. I take on responsibility even though it isn't actually my fault because like she's been taught, maybe not even directly, but her experience of her disability is kind of, and this is the hard thing with kids, is like kids don't have a context for how to interpret the world. And so way too often, and I would say for like the vast majority of people who come and talk to me in my practice, it's how did you contextualize things that happened to you when you were a kid? I contextualized it as it was my fault. Because if it's my fault, then maybe I can do something about it. Maybe if I apologize enough, maybe if I be nice enough, maybe if I do something, then maybe people will be different.
Yeah.
And it's like, such the sad thing because it's like,
in a weird way, saying I'm sorry gives you agency.
Yeah.
In a weird roundabout
well, you
way.
can do something to try to change the situation. And it's like, it shows how beautiful Shoko's heart is to be in that position, but it's not something that works for someone like Shoya.
Yeah. The other thing that this particular scene does is it introduces a visual theme that's going to repeat throughout the entire film. Yeah, gosh, this is going to be so difficult. It repeats a theme which is going to happen throughout the entire film, which is people reaching out their hands for each other. Yeah. The number of times that Shoko and Shoya actually reach out their hands to each other, it's gonna happen multiple times throughout the movie.
Yep.
And then come to a culmination later on in the film.
Yeah.
But it's a great way of introducing something in a way where you had connection and you intentionally broke it off. Yeah. And now for the rest of the movie, you're trying to reverse that. Yeah. And it's a throwaway little detail, but it's thematic.
Yep.
And it's in line with what the rest of the film is going to be about.
Yeah. Did you notice what the very first line in the movie that Shoya utters is?
No.
It's when Ueno says, hey, look, it's a girl who's the first person here.
やったじゃん石田女子だって
はあ興味ねえし
To me, it feels like that's emblematic for him of the primary problem with Shoya. Like, as this kid who's just doing his thing, being this wild, rambunctious, sixth grader, it's like, I don't care about anybody or anything else.
It's that lack of empathy.
Yeah. And to me, it feels like I do really appreciate that. It kind of reminds me in the therapist episode, we're talking about Robin Williams' character telling the audience the theme through his communication with his class about what's the most important part of therapy? Trust. Trust is what helps your clients get breakthroughs. In this, it feels like, what is the primary problem with people's ability to connect with one another? Because other people don't care. They're not interested. They're not paying attention. They're not attentive enough. They're not engaging with empathy.
It's funny that we're landed on this exact frame of the shot where we're really detailed look at Shoya's eyes. This is almost in my mind, now that we're talking about this, feels like the first moment that he's actually found empathy. This is right when he finds himself in the river, in the same position that Shoko was.
Yeah.
じゃあな翔也また明日
In this moment where he's in the water, it's like, oh, this reminds me of the time when that happened. It's like, this is the moment of empathy. Not what happened earlier with Shoko, but this when he's getting bullied.
Yeah.
This is his moment of discovering that. Oh, this is what it feels like. Because now I'm the person who is experiencing it. This is Shoko's experience that I now am going to have as my own experience, something we now share. Speaking of share, did you notice, again, one of these lovely little pieces where part of the connecting point is where we are the same as other people?
Yes.
And did you notice where one of the kids at the beginning said, oh, Shoya, she has the same nickname as you?
Yeah. And he didn't care.
この中で西宮さんに対するいじめや補聴器は一つ一つがとても高価なものだそうです。これ以上お父さんお母さんに迷惑がかかる前に石田。
So right before the teacher calls his name, he's already starting to put his hand up. Understandable for a kid. Hesitation in taking responsibility.
Yeah,
but he's moving towards it.
And it happens because he has this empathetic moment.
To his mom.
Yeah, he's relating it back to somebody he cares about.
Yeah. And then this piece of crap.
なあ、お前だろうが。早く食べようら!
Yeah,
Like,
go off.
the most, again, brilliantly framed and scripted by the writers, where they're like, Ishida, we know it was you. It's like, well, buddy, if you knew it was him, where were you? Where were you the last 5 months?
Yeah.
What is your whole friggin' job as an adult responsible for kids in the classroom? Responsibility. But the whole time, like you said, when he was like not turning around to face Shoko, doesn't care, isn't paying attention, isn't understanding. And again, we have this like, the kids attend to what the adults are doing.
Yeah.
They are watching and they are replicating. And so here you have this framing of like, obviously stand up. We know it was all your fault, of like, direct the blame, put it away from me as the adult. I won't take any responsibility. And then what do the rest of the kids do?
Yeah.
ことはあったかも。
島田は
まあ一応僕もやめとけとは言ったんですけどね。翔也聞かなかったし。
島田、お前も一緒にやってたじゃん。
Did you catch that he's reading Shoko's notebook?
Yes.
After he experiences the thing that causes him to have empathy with her,
Yep.
he's investigating the pain that she went through.
Yep. And which might actually be things that he's written in there.
Yeah, probably.
And so it's like reflecting back on, oh, this is what it feels like now. Let me go back and observe my behavior. But it's one of these things where I think understandably so for a kid, this isn't something that comes to him in a moment of epiphany.
Yeah.
Like this is a slow burn that's taking him a long time to figure out of like, wait, what is this feeling? And then how is this similar to this? And like really is struggling to figure out how to integrate this.
翔也、待ちなさい。翔也。先生の話、本当なの？
本当だよ。
Heartbreaking, but he's taking responsibility.
Yeah.
He's not, maybe not doing it in the way that you'd hope for. But for the first time, he's actually like, yeah, it was me.
Yep.
Maybe the way that he's doing it isn't perfect, but it's that little slow change that you're starting to see in his character.
And it's interesting too, because it's going to be something where it starts here, but as we go through the timeline, it's going to go through the space of adaptive response, beyond it to a place of maladaptive response on the other side. So there's not taking responsibility, there's taking responsibility, and then there's self-hatred. And it seems like one of the big problems is that Shoya really overshoots where to land responsibility.
Yeah. And also an idea where it's like it's showcasing the impacts of your actions and how that brings about empathy. It's like, oh, my actions have consequences to them.
It really is something that might kind of highlight the idea that empathy is developed through experience.
Yeah.
Without the experience of these things happening, it can be difficult to understand what it's like for other people. And then if you understand and notice that, oh, my suffering is like other people's suffering, that can help me say, oh, so what would I want someone to do for me? How would I want somebody to treat me? this is then also the way that I should reflect that in my own behavior towards other people.
Yeah.
But that's something that we have to learn, it seems.
翔ちゃん帰るよ明日からいい子にするんだよ
Oh, I didn't catch that the first time. Yeah. And again, like what a doing the most with the least.
Didn't draw much attention to it.
Couple seconds. No humongous emotional expression from her, but it's like...
What I love about this film is that it rewards you for paying attention.
Yeah.
It's almost like something that I wrote down that I wasn't sure how to express it, but I think it's this film is teaching you how to watch a film. Mm-hmm. It's going to the effort to allow you to experience the film no matter what your level of engagement with it is. If you were just passively watching this without much attention, you would still get the basic themes and elements. But you look at the little details, like for that one moment where he was thinking about his mom cutting hair, it showed her with earrings on. Mm-hmm. And now the absence of that is this little detail that maybe you didn't pay attention to that before, maybe you didn't see that. You would still gain the information just based on how that frame was set up. But having that extra little piece of information, it impacts you more and it rewards you for paying attention.
And it's really clear that the writers are sticking with their symbols. Yeah. Because why was it not a nose ring or bracelet?
Or why like was a watch or like,
Why was it earrings?
Because it's the ear, because Shoko's hearing aids, because...
The bleeding, the exact same framing.
Yep. Which goes back to empathy. It's like, this is something that I did to somebody else, and now it's happening to somebody who I care about.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you notice the shoes in the garbage?
Yeah.
Just like he threw hearing aids in the garbage?
Oh, I didn't notice
that. The more you look at it...
Can you go back to the shoes again?
It shows him picking out his shoes.
Yeah.
And then for just a brief moment, the shoes are in the garbage, like for 3 frames.
Okay, I didn't realize, because there's, I thought you were talking about different shoes, but in a different clip there, when he's on the ground, the shoes that he's wearing are the same ones that he gives to Yuzuru later.
That's also true, though. It's like, the more you look, the more you're rewarded.
Yep.
Pay attention.
Yep.
This film is screaming at you. It's like, everything matters.
Yep.
Everything is being done for a reason.
Yep. And it's crazy because like that level of depth, I feel like if you're going to watch it normally.
Yeah.
Like we watched it with the idea of, and rewatch it with the idea of we're going to go through and we're going to really break this down. I feel like if somebody's passively watching this, there's almost no way that you can like get all these pieces of detail.
No.
Because... And it's the beautiful thing about this because it's so deep that knowing whatever layer of attention you're giving to it, there's going to still be layers below it that support it.
This is the 3rd time that I've watched this film, and that's the first time I noticed the shoes. There's so much depth and symbolism to it.
Yep.
何してんの? なあ、俺の机で何してんの? 何やってたんだよ、気持ち悪い。
Like what an absolute friggin' sweetheart.
Yeah.
Like she's doing the same thing for him that she thought he was doing for her.
You know what's wild is I didn't even catch that till just now.
Yeah.
It's like he was pretending to erase the chalkboard. Of like, oh no, all these people wrote these mean things about you.
He was pretending to be nice. She's watching that and genuinely being nice in response.
My goodness.
またその顔。いいやつぶってんじゃねえよ。なんだよ。言いたいことあんなら言えよ。いつもわけわかんねえ顔しやがって。ムカついてんだろ。
I don't understand that look.
Wow.
And that pisses me off. It's like, I am frustrated that I do not understand you. And this is the response that he goes for.
何すんだよ。何なんだよ。何?
Oh.
なんだよ。わかんねえよ。
So that scene.
Yeah.
There's so many things there. There is like, I'm trying.
Yeah. That line got me.
And like, she's doing her best, but she's limited.
Yeah, it's like, do you think that I want to be an outcast? Do you think I want all this?
I'm not trying to be a problem. There's something wonderful too, I think, about the framing of the way that she was yelling there.
Yeah.
Like how that's going to mirror the yelling in a very different way at the end at the hospital when she's on the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing that eventually, the thing that actually finally brings them connection is foreshadowed here.
Yeah.
Where she kind of calls him back. And this is like your first iteration of trying that when you're trying so hard, but you don't know what else to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to watch. And it's one of those, it's such a weird scene because the music does this weird thing where it
went like a little bit up, right?
It's like, it's almost like happy, and it's just like, this is an uncomfortable mix of emotions. I feel like it's mirroring this idea of like she's saying, I'm trying.
Yeah.
It's almost like the music is saying like, I'm trying to.
Yeah. It's like the music isn't following the direct action, it's following the intention.
Yeah.
And there's a weird way to think about it, I think, of all violence is fundamentally communication.
Explain that.
So like the fact that they're getting into a fight here is actually one of the first moments where they first make physical contact.
Yeah.
And where they're expressing themselves.
Yeah.
And it's also the first time where Shoko actually gets to do something other than being nice.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, like, it's her reaching that point of, okay, the way that I'm doing it, the way of being kind, it's not communicating to Shoya that I'm trying.
Yeah.
So now I'm almost forced to communicate with him in the way that he would most likely understand.
Yeah.
It's the roughhousing, the way that he treats all of his friends, like how he engages with the world. I'm lost because the way that I'm doing it isn't working, so I'm forced to pivot.
Yeah. Everybody's got a breaking point.
Yep. Regardless of whether or not a particular act of violence is right or wrong, because I think there's lots of acts of violence that are fundamentally wrong. They are all still also fundamentally communication.
Yes.
Something is trying to be expressed through that, and it's so important to figure out what that is. Maybe not for the person who's on the receiving end, because obviously like protection, boundaries, all that stuff, way more important. But for the person who is expressing the violence, it's your responsibility to think, if I am acting out, what am I actually trying to communicate?
Yeah.
What am I actually trying to say?
これ私に来た忘れ物手話どうしてって覚えたてかこれ
This is a really, really important thing that the film does here. Did you catch that when she signed, we did not get subtitles?
Yep.
One of the two things that I think is really important about that is that there's going to be a lot of foreshadowing to, like, you're going to have to pay attention to what she's signing. That tells you about how she's feeling and where she's at.
Yeah.
But the second piece is that it forces you into a place where you can't understand her.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. It drags you right in as another person who's in the relationship with these characters.
Yeah.
Oh, I also don't understand you.
but in a way, it's almost like it's forcing you to empathize with her position.
Yeah.
She can't understand the people around her, and now we're forced into a position where we have to see her and what she's doing in order to actually understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And what an interesting choice too, to not show us the process of Shoya learning sign language. He just knows it.
Yeah.
And so you're forced then to look back and say like, oh, this is the gap between where he was as a kid and where he is now.
This is what he's been doing for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
僕も布団まで売っちゃってでもあんたのその気持ちが嬉しいところでさ翔ちゃん
Just that little moment where he picks up his little niece off of the chair and then places it, just like he's paying attention. It's like he's learned to observe the people around him.
Yeah. He's made, like you said off screen, lots of changes.
Yeah. And things that aren't like shoved in your face, like, look at how much this character's changed. It's like the more you look, the more you're rewarded for seeing the little details.
Yep.
It's like, this tells you more about him. He's
Yep.
like, he's changed.
He's changed, but his perspective has not changed.
Yeah.
And that's really the thing that needs to catch up in this scenario. And maybe a big part of understanding is going to be perception. His, other people's, the way they look at other people, the way they look at themselves, like, that's the thing that's really going to be transformed and shifted in this experience.
This film does that so well. All the details matter. And I think a great example of that is the money that he leaves his mom at the very beginning. You show something and then you actually follow through later on and explain what it meant.
死ぬのやめるって言わなきゃこれ燃やすわよあんたが汗水垂らして稼いで170万おい聞いてんのかこら
何バカなことを
バカはあんたよこの親不孝者
ごめんマジですいませんやめますすいませんマジで
何をやめるだはっきり言え
死ぬのやめます死ぬのやめます
It's probably good to talk about. I think it's kind of beautiful the way that you see his mom's intention.
Yeah.
Through that.
Although as much as it's not necessarily advised, like
I was about
in a
to
clinical
say,
setting, we don't necessarily do that and hold people to threats and things like that. There's safety plans and other
Yeah.
pieces. But when you're talking about the intention.
Yeah. Threatening somebody not to unalive themselves is probably not a good method. But I think it's weirdly, it shows us in this context how much she cares.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a poor choice in terms of what you would actually do is actually a great choice thematically to show the depth of care that his mom has for him.
And maybe it's another example in this show of how the things people are saying are not the things they are meaning.
Yeah.
Like she's saying, I'll burn this money if you don't promise me that you won't. But she's, I think, trying to communicate is that I love you and I don't want to see you go.
Yeah.
Like that's what she's really trying to say.
Yeah. I think it's also probably a good point to maybe talk about, like, we know the heart behind it, but the method is really, really not the best. If you're afraid that somebody you know might be struggling in that situation, is there more or less a consensus about the way that you go about handling that?
Honestly, I don't know. I think clinically we have a consensus more or less, or like a standard of practice that we have when it comes to like walk through with the person where they're at in terms of the stages, in terms of how much they are thinking or considering this, means, other pieces like that. And then how do you develop a safety plan? Do you say, okay, like here's the course of actions that I want you to follow. If you think about this or you feel like this, who are you going to get in touch with? Who are you going to call? Who are you going to communicate to provide some alternative avenues? Because that's really, I think, the most, when we think about the most respectful for people's dignity when it comes to their choices, not just making sure they do the right thing or not. Like, it's important to have the person engaged with you in the process. Like, there's the technical, what do you tangibly do with somebody who's in this position? But when it comes to the more personal side, how do you be with somebody who is in this position?
Yeah.
That's really different. And I think there was a piece where in this scene, they almost started to. Like when his mom asked, why? And he started to say, well, a lot of stuff happened, but I will like, that's the place to start really diving into and say like, lots of stuff happened. Tell me about what happened. Give me more information. I think a lot of the time people are really scared with the idea of like, oh, if I dig too much, then people are going to be more motivated. But the reality, I think, is quite different. Like the more that you bring these pieces up, the more that you can empathize with somebody's experience, the more you can make them feel like, or help them to feel like, you aren't weird, you aren't alone, that makes sense, but we have other things that we can do. There are other pathways around this, and I think maybe a good way to frame this idea is when people are in this position, most of the time, this is because we feel stuck. I like to think about it like, usually there are two things that you can do to navigate an experience, or three things, I should say. If there is a problem of some kind, the problem is often relational. It's between two different elements or people. And your choices are, you can change the environment and the thing that is happening around you. You can change yourself, or you can exit the environment or the relationship. And that's how people tend to problem solve and navigate their difficulties and challenges. That's how they get resolution on things. But if you can't change the environment, in Shoya's case, if you can't do enough to convince people to treat you differently, if you can't change yourself, and this is a matter of perception for him where he's doing lots of things, but because of the outside feedback, he doesn't see himself any differently. So there is no inside change. Can't leave the environment. What is he going to do as a 17-year-old kid? Is he going to like run, go do something else, start life somewhere else? When we feel limited in our options there, your brain is going to continue to look for ways to resolve the problem. It's always going to try to find a solution. And so I think for lots of people, it's important to understand whether they're working with somebody else or being with somebody else who's going through this kind of experience, or they're dealing with it themselves. Like, this is why we feel stuck. We feel like there's something that we can't change. And the key, I think, to transformation when it comes to this kind of issue is that there's always change available. No matter what kind of situation, and something can be different. It's just that when we're looking at our scenario, often we don't see where those changes are available to us. Someone hasn't presented them. We aren't aware of what they could be. And so it feels hopeless. But that's where I think the value of relationships, multiple other perspectives.
Yeah.
It's like, that's where you can start to get, that's where you can start to acquire hope from other people's perspectives.
Yeah.
What they see in you, you know, what lots of these characters, but especially in a beautiful way, what Shoyo and Shoko do for each other is to see each other in the way that they need to see themselves.
Yeah.
And then the connecting point, the understanding one another is like the transference of that perspective, the ability to see one another from that lens to give each other some hope.
It's a good point. It's beautifully put. I think, yeah. And one of the reasons I ask is because I think it's one of those things that you never think that you're going to come face to face with.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's one of those things that I think is really important to know. I haven't told you this before, but when I was an RA in dorms, actually, at university, there was one of the people who's in my dorm who expressed that he was having those thoughts and tendencies. And I just remembered feeling so lost and afraid because, like, I don't know what to do. Thankfully, like, everything was okay. I ended up going to one of my supervisors, one of the people who was in charge of helping me, and ask him, like, what do I do?
Yeah.
He walked me through it, and thankfully, I think, kind of like what you were mentioning before, is that one of the things that was really, really helpful is that there was a lot of other good guys in that dorm who created a community around him and provided that source of connection.
Yeah.
I don't think that was like a problem solver. It's not like that was the magical solution.
Yeah.
But man, it helped.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of sharing experiences, something that I don't think I've told you, and I've told maybe the tiniest handful of people, is that I've been there, but on the opposite side. When we were way younger, it's like 13.
Really?
Yeah. And so there was a moment where I had let's just say that I stood in Shoya's shoes for a minute there. And so I think as much as it's sad, it's also really important for people to understand that when they're feeling that way, that that is not an uncommon thing. And especially that like people who they might not expect to have experienced that, have experienced that. They've gone through it. They've been in that position. And that it is possible to come out the other side. That you can do things differently. But when it feels hopeless, it doesn't mean that it actually is hopeless. And one of the most important things, I think, the beautiful piece of this show is how much it highlights one of the most fundamental facilitators of feeling something different, which is connection and relationship with somebody else. It's like, that's what can take you out. Because I know for me, part of what led me to being in that position was lots of pieces of perception of self. And I think what Shoko says later on, what Shoya is about to say in this scene, like, epitomizes my experience. And I'm sure that there's probably lots of people who will hear him say these words and be like, oh yeah, me too. If not now, then at least at some point in my life, I have felt like this.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, Kurt.
It's hard for me not to like dismiss it, and kind of, there's a part of me that almost wants to be like, it is what it is. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
But that comes from like having over 2 decades to have processed this and to have gone through lots of different experiences, come on the other side, and to have done a lot of work to take care of that kid who I still carry with me. It seems super cliche, but I can tell people from experience that there is something fundamentally necessary and critical about like how you feel in the way that you treat yourself. It all comes down to that, because no matter what people do to you, no matter what people say to you, like where that stuff sticks is where it becomes a pattern that you repeat to yourself. At least I know for me, that was the experience. Was it may not have been the moments where things happen, but it was the moments where I echoed those things over and over and over and over and over again. And what that part of you really needs is compassion. Like, it needs support, it needs love, and it needs all that before things change, before things get better, before you feel like you deserve it. Like, it has to come first.
Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me.
Absolutely, dude.
I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah. It's weirdly, I think, I don't want to say necessarily that I'm grateful for the experience, but there really is a piece of me that can look back on it now and say, like, I have found lots of value in going through that. I have found, you want to talk about being in somebody else's shoes and then being able to develop empathy. Like, boy, has that been very helpful when other people have been in my office. Yeah. And I never say this directly to them. Like, they never know about my experience, but the way I'm receiving it is like, I'm having all these thoughts and it's scary. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. And you're not crazy or weird or out there because you're having these kinds of experiences. It's like, it's something that happens. It's something that we feel. It's something that we go through. And it's not something to once again carry through the same perceptions that get us here in the first place and judge yourself for experiencing that.
Yeah.
Because that is the opposite of what, when that feeling shows up, it's the opposite of what it needs. And so I am, I think, now able to say, years later, that I'm grateful for the transformative process of pain. because it's something that has allowed me to change in a way that I think has been good and has been valuable. And so I'm thankful that I was able to experience it in a way where it did not completely overwhelm me.
Me too.
Yeah. Thanks, bud. See, my turn.
I'm not clinically trained in how to process difficult conversations like this with people, but at the very least, I want you to know that I'm grateful that you got to the place where you are, and I'm really grateful that we're able to do this here now.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like we should hug it out.
Yeah.
そう絶対よ
あ、お母さん。
Also, there's a piece of me that really appreciates the levity here.
Yeah, it does a really great job of taking this really, really heavy moment and then allowing you to process it and then allowing you to release it really quickly.
Yep.
It's almost like these moments happen, but then life goes on. Life is messy. People aren't going to act the way that they should.
Yep.
Things are going to happen that you don't expect. That feels so much more powerful that way.
Yeah.
自分が犯した罪はそっくりそのまま自分に跳ね返る。その罪を背負い、罰を受ける必要のある人間だと思い知った。そして、俺は孤立した。
That statement from Shoya, I think, is really good at encapsulating the fundamental problem that he faces, and that kind of, I think, in parallel, people who are in this position will face often, is that, like, this idea that your sins come back to bite you and it is your cross to bear perpetually. The idea that there is no end, or like you talked about with the music, there is no resolution to this. It's just, I've made this mistake, I have done this thing wrong, and now this forever and permanently alters the trajectory of my life. That is a huge reason that people end up in a position of hopelessness, is because the belief structure says none of this will change, none of this will get better. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what restitutions I make. I'm always going to be kind of scarred by this experience. And it's beautiful then to see kind of the reframing that Shoya goes through, in that may not actually be the case. And the idea of him opening himself up eventually, but he starts here, even on the frame we're on now, of like looking down.
Yeah.
I'm going to, and it really kind of harkens that idea.
This is the first time that we really see him in his problem where he can't look people in the face.
From his perspective. And there's something about it that feels like it harkens to this idea of like hanging your head in shame.
Yeah.
He is so weighed down by the sense of shame that it is difficult to then look people in the eye.
Yeah.
Because, like, how uncomfortable is that when people feel like they're staring into their soul? Like, the eyes is that point of connection. We need to make sure that we eliminate that.
Yeah.
Because it's too painful.
And it's interesting, too, how it forces you, again, into a place of empathy, because it's literally a point of view shot from his perspective.
Yep.
You're going to see this happen a lot throughout the film, where you don't see people's faces.
Yep.
And I think that does a really good job of putting you in the position that the filmmakers want you to feel, which is that I cannot connect with anybody else around me.
Yeah.
And because you've cut out the thing that humanizes and connects you most to people.
Exactly.
It's the face, it's the eyes.
Where you see expression, where communication takes place.
Yeah. That guy.
Yeah.
One guy is like, hey, and he's completely, there's people around him who are trying to connect with him.
Yeah.
And he's completely oblivious to it because he's shut out the world around him.
Yeah. And I think it's so important about why this is a matter of not just, I mean, one way that people could interpret this film is like everybody has shut him out, but the writers, the creators are showing us that's not what it is. Like they're giving us hints where people's actions aren't necessarily lining up with the way that Shoya is framing them as shut out. Because yeah, this guy tries to like point out, communicate. Shoya might be alone a lot, but he's not completely cut off.
Yeah.
But him doing this, holding himself down, like not looking at people, this is such a self-protection mechanism.
Yeah.
If I expose myself to being open a little bit to somebody's kindness, it's going to mean that I also open myself up to people shutting me down.
Yeah.
Cruelty.
Yeah.
So just like hide away, be in your ball, be in your protective space. Don't let anything good in, so you don't let anything bad in too. And that's what happens to people so often when they have experiences, and especially repeated experiences, where it's like the bullying that he then experiences after he gets ostracized. It's like repeat. Eventually, your brain is paying attention to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it is going to start create, because it's one of the things that your brain is designed to do, is it's a prediction machine. It is supposed to predict your future environment and your future experiences so it can prepare you for it.
Yeah.
And so the more you go through those things like that, the more your brain's going to say, I should expect and anticipate this. And that's where a belief and a perspective is created.
Yeah.
Of like, I should anticipate this, so let me project that out in the world. Let me make the assumption that everybody is going to reject and ostracize me so that I am prepared to navigate this experience.
Yeah.
It is your brain attempting to be adaptive, but part of what happens because it's in this emergency state, it's also so protective that it's locked out from any new pieces of information.
Yeah.
It's so shut down that it's not willing to open itself up to experiencing new bits that might be helpful and saying, oh, maybe the environment now is not exactly like it is, or it's a little bit more nuanced. It's like once you're in that protection mode, it takes so much experienced safety to come out of that. And so the regular everyday, he can't make those nuanced choices. He needs to experience a degree of safety that is so vast that it feels like maybe it's actually okay for this whole thing to come down.
やめてください。
おい話せよ。
やめて。誰か助けて。誰か。助けてください。
Beautiful how, like, through the X's that are over top of everybody else's faces, you're able to catch little glimpses of Nagasuki's eyes and his emotion through it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's that little idea of like, through this shutting out of the world that you've tried to do, you're still able to capture these moments, these little glimpses of human emotion that connect you to somebody, that forces him to take action because he's gotten to the point where he actually has enough empathy that he's able to see the emotion in somebody else and take action because of it.
手離せって。
俺の貸すよ。
マジ？神じゃん。
パクられていた。
It kind of epitomizes the change that has occurred. I don't know if you've noticed, but like one of the big changes that's occurred for Shoya over the last 5 years is like the energy that he had as a kid is gone.
Yeah.
He is so like
chilled out.
He's down emotionally. He's so unexpressive often, like I think by default. And there's something I think that happens when we are also closing ourselves down and shutting ourselves off, that has an impact on the emotions that we experience and the emotions that we project into the world. It's like part of his protecting himself is going to mean that he also doesn't express those emotions. But there's something wonderful here about how that scene demonstrates how Shoya has changed. And like, he now observes a bullying response, and what is he going to do? I love the fact that they chose to have him deal with it through sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like, I am going to be the person who says, hey, let me resolve this a totally different way than I probably would have when I was a kid. I'm going to resolve this through, hey, you can take mine, you can do this. And I'm curious for Shoya how much of his self-sacrifice is partially because he doesn't feel like he is valuable enough to hold on to any of this stuff. That like sacrificing, giving himself is the easiest and most straightforward thing to do because he's not worth that much anyways.
Yeah. which is interesting because that's mirroring a little bit of the attitude that Shoko has. Yeah. So it's almost like that. Yeah. It's almost like he's taken on a little bit of her way of engaging with the world.
Yeah, because he's been through a similar experience now. But it's also great how this is kind of like that action for him is his first moment of beginning to open things up for change.
Yeah.
Like beginning to do that, to extend that kindness. Very similar, like you're talking about, to the way that he's like now interacting with his niece. Mm-hmm. Like that kind of intuitive kindness.
Yeah.
Now he's able to utilize that in these other interactions. And through this one, he's going to start to open the floodgates a little bit.
Yeah. And it's cool too how it showcases that change doesn't happen until you take action. And what life does is it does not change on your behalf. It presents you with opportunities, and it requires you to take action in order for those opportunities to turn into actual change in your life.
Yeah.
いた石田くん見てこれ見てこれ自転車いやー住所書いてあったからよかったよこれどこにあったんだろう田んぼに乗り捨てられてたいやめっちゃ探した
That's a cool line. I had to look everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a throwaway line that tells you how much effort somebody's been putting into something.
That was off screen.
Yeah. It's like this in a weird way. It's like you complained about in the Avatar live action remake.
Yeah.
You said all the cool stuff, all the character building happens off screen.
Yeah.
And that was a negative sense of it. And I think in this case, it's like what this does so well is that it puts such concise language in place so that you get all of the emotional results of, if you had seen that, we could have taken like a 20-minute excerpt to see Nagatsuki looking for the bicycle, being unsuccessful until he finds it. But you can also encapsulate that emotion in just a single line. And it picking and choosing its battles so carefully with what it shows so that you can pack in the most amount of impact into the smallest amount of space possible. That narrative efficiency.
Versus maybe if this was done a little bit more like the less kind of polished shows, it would have been like, hey, Nagatsuki, thank you so much. I know you put a lot of effort into getting that bike back for me. And it was cool because once you did that, it was like I was actually able to see you and that X fell off your face. Oh, you don't understand the X that I'm talking about? So part of what's happening for me right now is that my perspective is that I see X's on everybody's faces, and that's a representation for like, you don't need that. Mm-hmm. This is done simply, subtly, and concisely.
And weirdly, it relates back to exactly what you said about people are saying something and meaning something different. He's saying, I was looking everywhere for this. But what he means is, I really want to help you out.
Yeah. I'm going to be invested in the friendship.
I care.
Yes. Yeah.
よかった取り返せて石田君どうしたのいや
I think it's cool too. I think I'm so glad that the person that they chose to have the first X fall off and to be his first friend was the person that on the surface is the person who you would least likely expect.
Well, it's like, it's outcasts, right? It's like, who's different? Shoya is outcast. Shoko is deaf. She's outcast. That classic saying, like, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. Mm-hmm. And right now, Shoya is collecting a bunch of these standing out nails as points of connection.
In more of a realistic sense, it's kind of nice to see that it showcases that a lot of times friendships aren't these manufactured, we're going to create this because, it's just the people who you find yourself around you.
Happenstance.
One of our mutual friends who's become like truly one of my closest friends is actually somebody who we weren't friends beforehand. Both of our girlfriends were really good friends and we were just the boyfriends who were like, oh, you're cool, let's hang out. And then when we broke up with each of our respective girlfriends, when those relationships ended, ours continued. And it wasn't this thing like this manufactured of like, you, me, we're gonna be friends. It's like, it doesn't work like that. It's like life happens and you find yourself in proximity with people, and it's that repetitive interaction that then slowly builds and forms connection over time.
Exactly. Yeah. And it takes intention, right? Now, like Nagatsuki's really investing in this relationship.
自分を満足させるためだけに来てるなら帰ってください もういいですか。では。
おい少年、俺のたちが西宮さんに会いたいっつってんだ。
長塚君、
つべこべ言わずに出せやおら。
長塚君、なんでここに。
取ってきた。親友にありがちだろ。
There's two things here, I think, in this scene that I also realized. This is a really fun and messy way to showcase that you have so much more capability to navigate through life with people around you.
Yeah.
I think to relate it back to this thing that we're doing here, I've done YouTube for maybe 9 years total now, 10 years almost, as like trying to make this like a borderline career. And it has never been easier than when I've been doing it with you.
Yeah.
One extra person is like, it's not that like adding one extra person makes it 50% easier. It's 100 times easier now.
Yeah.
It's like the ability to discuss things, the amount of initiative and like the drive and the purpose that we feel like we have to keep going with this. It's like there's so much more momentum and so much more energy that I feel like I have to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And in the same amount of time, I'm able to do so much more. It's like, and it's because of that connection with people around you and being able to say, hey, can you help me out with this? Can we brainstorm this? It's like, and just in this little scene where it's like, he has somebody now to stand up for him. And it's messy and it's not the way you should go about it. And it's wrong, but it's like, you got somebody who has your back now.
Yep. It kind of makes me think about discussions I had years ago in grad school about ontology and the idea of questioning, is the fundamental way of the world being structured, at least for us as people, is it fundamentally relational, which we'd call a relational ontology. And it's like, if you look at everything as being relational in relationship to one another, is that fundamentally how life works, how the universe works? And I think it's at the very least a really important principle, and especially for us as people, to like, we can't discount or minimize the importance of the connections that we have with other human beings. Because like you said, how much additional flow is created when you have one relationship or one additional person on the team. Technically, if you had one more person, it is leaps and bounds monumentally more beneficial to have two people than one person when working on a task or project.
It's not adding, it's multiplying.
Yeah.
It's exponential.
Yep, that's a great way to put it.
全然知らない人。キモい。
まじめに
話せよ。
落ちるなよ、少年。
I didn't catch that. Oh, that was so subtle.
Well,
wow.
We're going to see that framed again very soon.
We're going to be just like a broken record at this point, but it's just like,
Yep.
the more you look, the more there's things to pull out. That's the sign of an amazing film.
Absolutely.
餌やり楽しい。あ、そっか。
Just little moments like that where he's like, asks her questions like, oh, that's right, you can't hear unless you see my face.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's paying attention.
Yep.
And that goes right back to the teacher at the beginning of the film where it's like, he was doing exactly the opposite. It's
Not
almost
paying
like
attention.
he's broken the cycle of emulation that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Where now that he's grown up, he's able to actually understand. It's like, oh, no. We have to do things differently.
How much do you feel like maybe that is the task of growing up, is breaking the cycle of unhealthy emulation?
西宮、やっぱそれあんまし見ない方が。待って、西宮。
It's that recurring theme of reaching out for connection.
Yep.
And also jumping off the bridge at the same time.
Yep. There's like going into the pool of water from the beginning.
Yeah.
But then there's also her on the ledge at the end.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an interesting piece here where there's a miss, and I wonder how much that's indicative of the distance between their understanding right now is the distance between their ability to connect. But it's his capacity to understand that in the future is going to result in a critical moment of that connection being established.
I think too, what I love is that people keep jumping off of bridges. Like, that's what Shoyo was doing at the beginning was going to do. That's what happened just here. It's like, you're going to see here, he gets in trouble for jumping off the bridge.
Yep.
And it's like, but you also notice that like the bridge is the place where they keep meeting, where they keep growing this bond. But what is a bridge?
Connection point between two shores.
Exactly. It's the place of connection. And I find it so like beautiful and ironic that the thing that he's jumping off of at the beginning of the film, or the thing that he was going to jump off of at the beginning of the film, was also the metaphor for the antidote to what the problem actually was.
Yeah. It's like it was right in his face, but you don't realize it because it's symbolic.
Yeah. This film's saying a lot of things. Part of me is wondering if there's a thesis to this film that's saying that the meaning to life is human connection.
Yeah. Or maybe even what gives life meaning is human connection. Regardless of what the meaning might be for any given person, that it will be found in your relationships.
Yeah.
Or the relating to something rather than isolation.
Yeah.
Even if it's relating to an idea or a concept or a value or a cause or anything, those are all still matters of relationship. But it's easiest for us to grasp elements of relationship when it comes to things between us and other human beings.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about the setup to that, or about the framing, or about the way they did that shot, where it's like she does this and you don't need to be told what it means. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It's like it's upbeat enough and she's smiling to be, it's like, this is a happy signal.
Yep.
It's also like, it's just like, it feels like you get, it's like, see you around.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the feeling you get.
Yeah.
But it took no effort whatsoever to communicate that. And we almost feel like we're gaining a connection with her now.
And it's weird too, because we're watching this as a Western audience, and I almost guarantee you that they're not using American Sign Language. They're probably using Japanese Sign.
Oh, I didn't even realize there was a difference until, yeah.
Because there's multiple, depending on your language, depending on your region, there's lots of different forms. American Sign Language isn't the only one. And so it's interesting to me that even though it is a sign language in what is most likely a different nation's sign language, it still connects. We still understand what that means.
この人。え？何これ？
石田君、ちょっと職員室に来なさい。
The staff at the school brought Shoyo in because he jumped off the bridge and they punished him for it. But how much of that is a metaphor that instead of asking, why did you jump? They just punish him for it.
Instead of like his friend who asked, why did he jump?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It doesn't put the authority figures at school and the education system really in a positive light at all.
Well, and it's interesting because when you think about, this is a bit of a culture that's a little outside of our own, so we don't have as much of a context for it. I wonder if we talk to somebody who is a little bit more experienced personally when it comes to being within and growing up in the Japanese culture, whether or not you would say that the predominant way that authority figures for kids in Japan fail them in these kinds of ways is not through the aggression, but through the apathy.
Ooh.
And I don't know how much that might just be a Japan thing, because I would imagine something that broad could be universal to humans, just like a way that it shows up. But no matter where it is, it's like it's always on the spectrum of abuse and neglect.
Yeah.
Is it abusive? Is it neglectful? It's cool here because I wonder how much there's symbolism of like Shoya taking care of Yuzuru in the way that his younger self would have needed to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And then there's always that stepping into somebody else's shoes metaphor.
Yeah.
Where now literally at this point, this is where there's a transition in the relationship with Yuzuru and Shoya.
Yeah.
Where now she's going to be a lot more empathetic towards him and they're going to build that connection.
There's also a piece where I don't know how much this is not a literal attempt, but something where subconsciously, like, Shoyu's going back in time and trying to treat somebody at that 6th grade age the same way that he should have treated Shoko. The idea of like seeing somebody in need and addressing those needs and like thinking ahead. Because you saw like there's that moment where he was holding up the umbrella and he was holding something like in his stomach and you didn't know that it was the shoes yet, but it's just like I'm thinking about this.
Yeah.
It's like I had the impression based on like the fact that you weren't wearing shoes before, you're probably going to be walking home barefoot. I'm going to take these shoes and I'm going to help you. I'm going to look forward, see your needs and address them.
Yeah.
The way that I should have all of those years ago.
Yeah. And it's something really cool here where it's similar to something that I talk to my clients about a lot, where people can oftentimes struggle with the idea that if I never had a need met, how do I know how to get it met? It's like, if I never had this demonstrated for me, how do I know how to do the same thing for myself or for other people? And there's something really cool that I love talking to them about of like, a template is helpful, but you don't necessarily need one. Because just the fact that you know something should be different, the fact that you know through your experience of pain or suffering that something was negative or bad or unhelpful for you, it's like the difference between there being a jewel embedded in a material and having an indent in that material with no jewel. Even though the jewel is not there, you know something belongs there because of the absence. And if you have the ability to detect absence, then you have the capacity to find a way to fill that. And I think that's beautifully what, Shoya is doing here is like, I didn't get treated the way that I should have. I didn't know how to treat anybody the way that they should have been treated. But now, through that experience and the pain that it brought on, I know that something different is required. I have to go the opposite direction that I went and that everybody else went towards me. And I've got to go this way instead, bringing him closer to the way Shoko was doing things.
耳が聞こえないからって面白がってたでしょ。ねえ。で、今更しは覚えたって。何それ。なんかまともな人間にでもなったつもり。気持ち悪いんだよ、お前。
そう。
This is one of those moments where you maybe haven't been really attuned to the fact that he's not looking people in the eyes. It really telegraphs to you that this is what's happening without being too on the nose about it.
Yep.
Which is great. But then it's also great what Yuzuru does in like just after this.
Yeah.
俺最低な人間だから。本当は生きてちゃまずいやつだから。せめてもう石宮を泣かせたくないって思っただけで。
When you saw him say, "That's right, I'm a terrible human being. I don't deserve to live. I just want to see Shoko be happy." Or how does he frame it exactly?
He says, but at least I don't want her to cry anymore.
Yeah. So there's something there that I love, which is he has this framing of himself. I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve to live.
Yeah, this is maybe the first time that you've heard it explicitly stated.
Yeah.
Really like that.
His self-perception has become evident here. But he immediately follows up with that with something that I think is amazing, which is his position towards Shoko, towards somebody else. I don't want to see her cry. And it's crazy the contrast, because it's like, here's this framing that he has, and then he ends the statement with exactly what makes him not a terrible person. Embedded in there is his desire to see something good happen for somebody else. That's the opposite of a terrible person. And so that's where he has that part of himself. More important, I think, for people to understand than like making amends, fixing your problems, like doing right by people. All that stuff's valuable and good.
Like a big show of remorse.
Yeah, but all that stuff can be just like that. It can be a show. The actions need to have something behind them. Have you grown that thing inside of you that is the source of doing these things for the right reasons, right? Not this is what I should do or supposed to do, or I'll make amends, or this will fix everything, but genuinely this is what I want. I want Shoko to not cry anymore. I want that pain to stop. That's beautiful, because it's the essence of... I try not to be too reductionistic when I'm looking at people in the world, but if there's one way that I will categorize anybody and everybody in a moment, It's the idea of you have two ways to navigate the world fundamentally. You can, and it has to do with how you deal with suffering. You can either take the suffering that you experience and you can transmit it to other people, pass it around, and through that make it bigger, or you can transform it and you can reduce it and then help other people reduce it in their own lives. And to me, the transition that I think really indicates the true change that's happened for Shoya is he has gone from somebody who transmitted his suffering to somebody who is now making an attempt to learn how to transform suffering, starting with that position. And the essence there is, I think, the fundamental reason why his perception of himself is wrong. He has done terrible things, absolutely. But the idea that he is a terrible person dismisses this growing, essential, organic good within him that is possible for everybody. But I think so often for people who deal with self-hatred or self-loathing, we are blind to experiencing that thing within ourselves. We don't see that value. It's like the way that he looks at everybody else and they're all X'd out. It's like we cross out those parts of ourselves. And it's wonderful to see him for the rest of the film. Like, that's his pursuit. That's his goal. How am I going to help Shoko not cry anymore? And it's in the pursuit of that, not in his success, not in the things that he does that now makes him not a terrible person, but it's through his embodying that essence of transforming suffering. That is what makes, not even worthy of living, but like, that is what's going to make his life worthwhile. That's what's going to make him feel better about himself and his existence. This is my position towards things.
Yeah. That's also what makes me think that Yuzuru might be the most underrated character in this entire film. It's because she's the only one who's able to perceive that. She's the most perceptive person in the entire film. As soon as she realizes...
It's almost like you give her a camera because she's the most perceptive person in the film.
Again, almost like they thought through every iota of this film down to the last atom. It's like everything is correctly in place. Because that's why she pulls up the umbrella. That's why she re-establishes connection, because she perceives that you're actually doing this for the right reason.
Yeah, it's in exact opposition to the statement that she made to him in the classroom. If you're just doing this to make yourself feel better.
自分を満足させるためだけに来てるなら帰ってください.
It's like, no, I'm not. And this is where I'm saying it from a genuine place. She detects it.
And the reason she's saying that is because, just like we talked about before, that you're able to gain empathy and connection with somebody because of shared suffering. That's Yuzuru's goal too. She wants Shoko to stop crying too. They both have the same goal now. And so that's the point of connection. That's why she establishes connection, is because oh, we're the same.
It's their shared framework.
起きてる。びっくりしすぎて。
あたごは
待ってその前にどうしたの？今日ポニーテールじゃん。なんで？
Seeing her do her hair differently, there's an obvious piece about like she's now trying to look really pretty to impress Shoya and all that kind of stuff about going with a confession. But I think the underlying piece that hits in terms of the symbolism and how it's framed is like her hairstyle that she has chosen reveals the hearing aid. And there's a piece of like, in her attempt to connect and get more closeness with Shoya, it inherently requires the revealing of a vulnerability. My limitations, the challenges, or even maybe if it's not a limitation or a challenge, but like the thing that I might not like about myself, that's going to get exposed the closer that you get to somebody. And a huge part of connection is, how do we treat people's vulnerabilities? It's the whole reason that Shoya caused so much damage at the beginning, was he really took advantage of somebody's vulnerabilities in a terrible way, which constituted cruelty. And now that same thing, her limitation, her deafness, that's going to be what potentially can bring them closer together. And so it's a kind of nice choice, I think, in them getting her to change her hair like this.
And it also lines up with that vulnerability coming at the same time as her trying to speak more, not just relying on sign languages.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those things go in tandem. It's like you're maybe on the surface exposed to this new thing where it's like putting your face like, oh, new hairstyle, blah, blah, blah. But that's representing something a little bit deeper, and you're going to see a different version of that you're not exactly being spoon-fed.
西宮手話うんごめん全然大丈夫
I love how the film teaches you how things are going to play out. It primes you and it shows you in a very gentle way how to digest the film. Shoko did this. We didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
And then we see Shoyo trying to do it too, and he's trying to learn. And then we see him do it and say what it meant.
じゃあまた
Gives you the context.
He gives you the context, but what that's also doing is hearkening back to when Shoko did this, and he didn't know what that meant. And then he was brought into the place where he's like, oh, I get it now. And we're experiencing that same thing. That exact scenario that happened to Shoyo and Shoko is happening to us as an audience.
Now I get what this means.
Tsuki? 綺麗だね西宮
It's the whole movie. It's missed connection after missed connection after missed connection after missed connection.
Yep. I love too how he doesn't understand what these are for.
Yeah.
Another point of misunderstanding. And he'll only discover way towards the end what they're actually for, which kind of mirrors that idea of the closer he's getting to understanding. There was so I watched, I think, a different translation or a different edit, and it's interesting because in this one it said he didn't understand me. The one that I watched said it didn't get through to him, or it didn't reach him. Is maybe the way that it was translated. Yeah, all valid ways of doing it, but just like fascinating how it's that like, again, it's like handing you the themes we're exploring. What reaches people? Where are we limited? And how does that loss of connection make things difficult for us?
小学生の頃はさ、怖くて乗れなかったんだ。弱虫だったからね。でも少し見方変えてみた。怖いかどうかは乗ってから決めることにしたの。やっぱまだ怖いけどね。来るよ。
I felt like the conversation they had there was great, especially coming after Shoko's attempted confession, because it feels like it really highlights and kind of almost gives an articulation of what's happening there of like, look, reaching out to people and connecting is scary. Like maybe never more so than like confessing to somebody that you really like them. Yeah. And then having to await what the response is. Like that's terrifying. Yeah. But the idea of what Sahara says here is cool, and that's like, I'll figure out whether that's scary or not after it happens. There is inherently something where you have to go and do things even when you're scared. Yeah. And reaching out and trying to understand people and get connected to people is going to inherently mean you have to overextend yourself to something that feels a little bit outside your comfort zone and has some scary things. Maybe I will risk being misunderstood. Maybe I will risk misunderstanding somebody or looking silly or anything like that. But in order to forge any kind of connection, you have to bridge the gap and make that connecting point with somebody.
ほら、なんていうか、友達っぽい。
That line of,
Do I have the right to have this much fun?
it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's like, do I deserve to have this? For somebody who feels like, do I deserve to even be here? How difficult is it then to be like, do I even deserve to enjoy myself? Because, like, I'm a terrible person. Terrible people don't deserve to have good things happen to them. Terrible people don't deserve to enjoy life. At least that's the perception that we have.
Which is kind of interesting how it comes right after Sahara kind of gave that talk about, I had to change my perspective.
Yeah.
That conversation was the perfect one to precede the moment where maybe Shoya's opening himself up to change his perspective. At least he's recognizing it.
At least he's grappling with it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm having fun. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Not, I shouldn't be having fun, but like, is this actually okay? There's also a piece where it's maybe a good point to talk about it now. I don't know if you've noticed how in this whole scene in the amusement park, Ueno has the X over her face go back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, there's some moments where she has it and there's some moments where she doesn't. And I wonder if you feel like there's any particular symbolism to that. I'm not sure. I have ideas, but I don't know if I'm confident in any of them.
Part of me wants to say that that might be reading too much into it. But at the same time, we've been saying so many times this episode, it's like the more you read into it,
Yep.
the more you're rewarded.
Yep.
I think the simple brush it off answer is she's the character who very openly has that X disappear and reveal, like, intentionally multiple times.
Yeah.
Maybe not in this exact scene, but you see that X like actually peel off.
Yeah.
Or peel back on in one instance.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that thinks maybe that's priming you to be ready for when this happens, that like X's can come and go.
Yeah.
But I also do think that if we're reading a little bit more into it, I do think that there's something to say that those moments don't happen in this big, flurry, magical establishing.
Yeah.
I mean, they ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're on the precipice and you feel like maybe you can, maybe you can't, maybe you can, and it's going to vary.
Yeah. I wonder if it's like Shoya's openness to her.
Which is fluttering back and forth.
Yeah, like,
I don't know how I feel about her.
Yeah, am I connected? Am I open to her being here? Is she somebody who it's okay for me to open up my protective bubble to? And it might be where she's kind of on the edge of like, sometimes I trust her, sometimes I don't. Kind of given both in this particular scene, both Yuzuru and Sahara are talked to about, are you okay having Ueno here?
Yeah.
And it's like, don't know, hesitant maybe, could be fine, we'll see.
I also think that there's a question about, is it Shoya who's taking on and off the X, or is it Ueno?
Yeah.
Because she's also asking questions like, do you hate me?
Yeah.
Like that goes both ways.
Yeah.
We've already established that Shoya isn't shut out of everybody else's life. He's shutting himself out. So how much of that is happening on the other side of the spectrum? How much are other characters doing that? And now he's on the opposite side.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning too that in the Ferris wheel scene, I think the most prominent point of that entire thing is Ueno saying, you never tried to understand me.
私あんたのことが嫌い小学校の時さ私はあなたへの理解が足りてなかったでもあなたも私のことを理解しようとしてなかったよね
Even if it's from you could call it coming from a selfish, immature place. But even if it is, it still indicates that that's the thing that she's looking for. I want to be understood.
Yeah.
And when I'm not understood, like Shoya said when he was a kid, I don't understand you, it's pissing me off. It's almost like Ueno is that trajectory for Shoya if he never changed.
Yeah.
That she's continued on that pathway of the people who don't understand me piss me off.
Yeah. It's contrast. It's showing that like we know the place that we want Shoya to get to, but you're not really thinking about the place where he could go if he's not careful.
The heaven you pursue and the hell that you avoid.
ごめんだった別に私は謝ってほしいわけじゃないのあの頃はお互い必死だったし今思えば仕方なかったことかなとも思うでも今更仲良くしましょうなんて話をするつもりはない
今でも私はあんたが嫌いだし、あんたも私が嫌い。だからね、これからは穏やかにいかない？嫌いな者同士さ、握手。てか、私が嫌いで。
It's so hard because it's like you look at her from the outside and Shoko is the sweetest person in this entire show, if not like all of anime. Like just wonderful, beautiful heart. And then it's like, what would you have to hate yourself for? It's only because of a limitation that you can't control and the fact that other people hate that or have a hard time with that about you. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason. But when it's so predominant and impacts so much of your life, I can absolutely see where a perception of self would develop of like, oh, I hate myself, not good enough, not worthy, don't deserve, right? Nobody likes me, I'm in the way, I'm a burden, whatever people would begin to believe.
Yeah, it sort of forces you to confront this idea that you'd be shocked and surprised by what people think about themselves. Like what you see on the surface is probably so far removed from the actual experience that somebody else is living.
Yeah.
And you knew that looking at Shoko throughout this film, but this is the first time that you're really confronted with that. It's like, you're the best person out of all of these characters who are all like wonderfully three-dimensional, fully fleshed out characters who we connect with. You're obviously the best person, the best soul amongst these people.
Yeah.
And if that's how you feel, what does that say about the rest of the world?
Yeah.
西宮には西宮のこと好きになってもらいたいよ。
I love too how there's a bit of a progression about what is Shoyo's goal. He started out, I at least want her to not cry anymore. Then it's, I want her to come to love herself.
Yeah.
And then it ends with,
Yeah.
I want you to help me live.
Sometimes a good first goal for somebody who's struggling to value themselves is to assist somebody else in seeing the value in themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's like, at the end of the day, really, it's great that Shoya has this goal to help Shoko love herself. But the truth is that he needs that just as much as she does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the process of being able to show somebody else their worth. The wonderful thing is that the exact same things apply to you. And so that when you can demonstrate to somebody else, here's why you're valuable, here's why you deserve to live, here's why you're worthy of loving yourself, you have to play by the exact same rules. The same things apply to you just as much as it applies to them. Because we're all people. Because we're all fundamentally, despite our differences, we're all the same. We're all connected at the core. When we get to that point of what do I love about myself, it helps me love other people. When I help somebody else see how do you love yourself, it helps me learn how can I love myself too.
Yeah. It kind of harkens back a little bit to, we talked about this in the Father's episode, Long John Silver in Treasure Planet, the idea that he was quite literally one of the main villains of the show, and that process of becoming a surrogate father to Jim was one of the avenues of his transformation.
Yeah, like
helping
he helped
somebody
Jim.
else. Yeah,
he helped Jim develop into that valuable person, giving him his whole speech. But it's like, how much does that wake something up inside of you? In the same way, something's woken up in Shoya through this pain and this process of trying to help Shoko. It's like that thing that wakes up when you want to take care of somebody and love somebody. It's like, it's cool because it's that essence that makes you valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the things that you do. It's like, it's that element of being able to love that makes you capable of loving yourself.
Yeah. I think you put it really well actually in that previous episode, where it's like, you can't engage in that process of transformation in somebody else without having it touch you too.
Yeah, you are always going to be impacted. Yeah. And it's the beautiful curse of helping somebody else, is that you will ultimately and without your choice be positively transformed by the power of their love coming through them towards you.
I find it interesting too how it's weird how the final piece, when they're on the bridge at the very end, It's almost like the final evolution of that goal for Shoyo to Shoko is giving her a job to do. It's like, I want you to have the job of helping me. And it's weird. It's like, how much do we find purpose in the job of engaging with others?
Yeah.
How much is taking on a role in the lives of other people the thing that actually gives life its meaning?
Well, you could think about it like the vehicle through which we can express the meaning of life,
Yeah.
right? It's like you were saying before, like the transformation has to come through an action. It has to be actualized and manifested in the world through a tangible activity. And I think it's like, in a lot of ways, it's the natural outworking of the love that we can develop for ourselves and for other people. It's like, what do you then do with it? You now have the means to have meaning in your life to support other people, to help them engage in living in a good life. And kind of, again, by proxy, because you're in a community with people who are all doing the same thing, you do that for you too. They do that for you. You get that interconnected web of people who are supporting and caring for one another with empathy and with love and understanding. Yeah. There's something I love too about the idea of being at an art installation where it's like all this weird modern stuff. It's hard to understand. What's the meaning? What's the purpose?
That's such a good point. It's like, I'm trying to understand what the artist is trying to communicate to me.
Nishimiya.
So subtle, but it's just like
another moment.
Bibitta. なんで謝んの？そんなわけねえじゃん。なあ、西宮、明日は。西宮は私と一緒にいると不幸になると言った。西宮を不幸にしたのは俺なのに。
Shoyo will only get hurt if he sticks around her.
I cause problems. I'm the thing that's wrong. I'm the thing that creates pain for other people.
But it's beautiful how you're like, that's so wrong. But it's also acting as foreshadowing because that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not for the reason that she's expecting, though. Not for the reason that she thinks.
And it's the sad part because it's like, in a way, these distorted perceptions that we have of ourselves, that we gain through suffering that we experience, that nobody helps us process, a lot of the time, those are the things that are responsible for us creating self-fulfilling prophecies in our life. She's right. He will get hurt if he sticks around, but not because she's a bad person, but because she hates herself. That is why he will get hurt. Not because she's wrong, not because she's broken, not because she's flawed. None of those reasons. Nothing inherently wrong with her. Only the way that she looks at herself because of the way that other people have taught her to look at herself. Which for some reason makes me so mad right now.
I can tell you're getting pissed off.
Friggin', this is an imaginary animated character on the screen who's not a real person, but I'm so upset at the imaginary people who have done this to her. It's like
because it
brutal.
Says something about the world that actually exists.
Yeah.
You're not mad at the individuals. You're mad at what they represent, and because that exists in the world that we're in.
Yeah. There are Shokos in the world right now and people who have created that.
That's a heartbreaking way to put it. There's also something beautiful how their first train ride together, they were separated. Now they're sitting so close together. The proximity, the physical proximity that they have to each other gets closer and closer and closer and closer as time goes on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's subtle. You're not spoon-fed that, but it's like you just see little glimpses of that.
Whoa! うまそう。
何してるの？なんでこの子がいるの？翔子、あなた何のつもりなの？帰りなさい。
まあお母さん、いいじゃん、おめでたい日なんだからさ。
ゆずる。
似合ってるよ。
I've been struggling with how to put this into words, but it's weird how this is an animated film, but there's nothing that makes it need to be animated. You could do this live action.
True.
There's a lot of extra artistic liberty that you could, even things like coming up in the fireworks scene, there's going to be some low shutter speed sort of effects that are thrown. You can do that in a camera in the physical world. What are you gaining by doing this in an animated form? I think one of the things that I really appreciate is the ability to perfectly emulate human emotion in a way that actually is strangely more real than if it was acted in live action. I think we talked a couple episodes ago about how it's interesting how a lot of filmmaking is done with things that are not real, but that feel more real than what's real.
Yeah.
So the idea of like bones breaking in sound design and in Foley work is not actually bones breaking. It's celery, it's vegetables, it's all this stuff, but it comes across in a way that's perceived as more real than the real thing would be. I think in a wonderful way. I think that's one of the beautiful reasons that this works best as an animated feature, because the way that they're able to capture human emotion, like just the eyes that the mother has here, that piercing look is so hard to get perfect, but it feels so much more real.
Well, I wonder how much that might be because, and I've never thought about it before you mentioned this, but like animation really feels like a medium where you have flawless control over your actors.
Yeah.
You have 100% capacity to determine every micro moment, every movement, every frame of the scene can be intentionally constructed.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of artistic value in like the level to which you can express things like symbolism here that you might have a harder time doing working with actors who, I would say, actors probably have less control over their ability to have a performance than an animator does to control the performance of a character on screen in an animated film. They will do what you want, when you need it.
I think there's also a better way to put it that doesn't necessarily, because neither of us are saying that actors are overrated or they're like they don't matter. But we're not saying that.
Yeah.
But I think what you're getting at is the idea that it feels like it's a lot easier for an animated film to achieve the same result as a film done by an auteur as opposed to a production company.
Yeah.
There is the ability to have so much more fine detail and control over what you're trying to do. If you have somebody, so the idea of somebody who is a writer, director, and has a good relationship with their editor and cinematographer is able to have much more control over the end result of their film. Like Christopher Nolan, part of the reason that he's such an incredible director is because he's less of a director doing a role within a production, and it's more of his film. And so I think that's what animation is able to achieve a lot simpler. But I also think that a big piece of it is that animation predisposes you to be okay with impossible expressionism. So the idea of the X's, that's a very blunt way of, you couldn't really do that. A VFX version of an X over top of somebody, it doesn't come across the same way. There's not that same meshing and synergy. It doesn't feel like it works when you think about that. It's like it's not the same feeling. In the same way, there's going to be a scene, it's going to be the scene coming up after the fireworks where there are some non-human ways that Shoya moves that don't follow the laws of reality and the way that you interact in the world. You can't actually move certain ways, but they express something. And you're not able to do that in a live action.
Yeah.
But you are able to do it in animation.
It makes me think when you're saying this that animation is the medium of precision.
Precise expression.
Yeah. You have the ability to be more precise in animation than you do, I think, in any other film or story-based artistic medium.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have control over everything the characters say, do. Like even I'm looking at the mom's image right now, and like the way that the strands are just slightly disheveled. It's like the artist has complete control over that.
Yeah.
They can be as precise as they need to be. There's a value of things that you create that will really benefit from that extra level of fidelity.
Yeah. I also think that to make sure that people don't think that we're poo-pooing on film as opposed to animation, I think it's also worth bringing up that there's an element of messy, chaotic, 1 in a million moments that's only possible in film.
Yeah.
Like the performance of an actor that's like messy enough that it's like, it's so real, or you catch the lighting because the sun was coming down at a particular angle. Yeah. There's these moments of like intense beauty, these 1 in a million moments that you can capture on film, you can never replicate again, that is inherent to film as opposed to animation. So it's not about one medium being better than another.
For sure.
But I think what you and I are saying is that the filmmakers are such masters of their craft that they understand their medium and they're using it to the maximum potential.
Yeah, that's funny.
Looks like you avoid getting killed, Ishida.
Yeah, for now.
It's like, oh my gosh, all these throwaway lines that have so much depth and meaning that you don't catch on a first showing. Like this is the third time I've watched this. I'm just now realizing, oh,
that's what that means.
That's the theme.
Yep.
I forgot about it.
Yep. I love this piece of demonstrating different perspectives of a shared experience.
It's something that's connecting everybody even despite their distance. And it's also the thing that we saw at the very beginning when Ishida was on the bridge.
I was going to say, did you notice the carried theme?
Yeah.
Fireworks in each of these moments where we're looking at what's going to show up next.
I'm amazed at how they were able to do a scene like this that clearly demonstrates something so horrible, and does it in a way that is simultaneously so beautiful, but does not glorify it.
Yeah. I think that kind of is contributed a lot to the tone that this whole film is set, right? It's like the theme, the feeling, the visuals, everything that's kind of preceded this, like has carried into this moment where you don't have to do very much. It's like minimal effort to communicate a message within that context.
Yeah. There's also something I was talking before about the leverage that you have to be able to use animation to do things that you can't quite do in live action.
Yep.
There's a piece there where he's taking that one last jumping step.
Yep.
That the way that it's animated is it's inhuman levels of effort and acceleration that's not possible to capture in live action without overcranking or without doing some sort of speed ramping or something that it's not easy to come across that way in live action. But what it does is it infuses a simple moment with so much added emotion because the level of effort, you understand that the level of effort that he's putting into running after her is proportional to how much he cares.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's this little decision that means in the grand scheme of things, it's not the most important thing, but they took that extra effort to be like everything. The way that he shouts her name, he's never shouted Shoko before. He's shouted Mishima before.
That's right. Yeah. It's a different level of intimacy there, a different level of closeness, different level of understanding.
And at the same time, it's also completely futile because she's deaf. It's desperation, trying something that he knows. He's so attentive. He's done so many times where he's like trying to talk to him like, oh, that's right, you can't hear because you're not looking at me. And he's fully aware. But Like, it doesn't matter because it's just at a certain point, it just takes over. It's like
instinctive.
It's desperation.
Yeah. Yeah. Immediate relief when I saw this shot was like, oh,
yeah,
thank goodness.
And what a beautiful culmination to the theme that we've seen of reaching out and missing each other's hands for so many times.
Over and over and over and over again.
All the foreshadowing, all the build-up. It comes to this moment where it's like, finally, there's a payoff.
Yep.
あの時つけた傷俺ちゃんと謝ったっけごめんな西宮ちなみに西宮俺はさ
There is something really incredible about the idea of like, he ends up in the situation that he planned to start in the first place.
Yeah.
It's
irony.
But it's a totally different reason. Like, instead of him giving up, he's doing it because he's protecting somebody and caring about somebody.
Just like Shoko said, you're going to get hurt. It's like, for a different reason.
Yeah.
Everybody ends up in exactly the position they anticipated.
Yeah.
But it's never the reason that they're expecting. It's never the reason that they think they're going to end up there.
Yeah. It's because in a lot of ways, I think, in the same way that these people are struggling to understand the people around them, they're also struggling to understand themselves.
Yeah. Even you can extend that even to people like Ueno, who's like, I think she made a statement like this was always destined to happen. And it's like, it is because of your decisions. Yeah. It's like things are ending up exactly like you anticipated, but not for the reasons you think.
Yep. Yep. Because those beliefs, those perspectives, they set us on a track. They are what determine our behaviors and dictate what we do, how we choose to respond to experiences. Mm-hmm. And that then determines our future.
Ishida-san. Nishimiya-san. 西宮さんごめんなさいまたこんな形でご迷惑をおかけしてすみませんでしたやめてくださいきっと息子がまた翔子さんに何かしたんですお願いだから
It's amazing to see how you get these moments of transformation from all these different characters and sometimes they're the characters that you least expect.
Yeah.
And I think it's so wild because it's something that feeds into this whole idea about changing your perspective. Yeah. You have this imaginary version of Shoko's mom, who is this cold, harsh, this person who tore out the earrings from Shoyo's mom, who slapped Shoyo on the bridge, who's piercingly like looking at him like how dare you be in my household? And that's also the same person who then has this deeply sincere apology and this character reversal, and it forces you to realize that you put her in a box and you needed to change your perspective about her.
Yep. Everybody's capable of change.
Yeah.
Even who seem to be the most rigid, the most hurt. Mm-hmm. These people do have the ability and the potential to change in the right circumstances.
何してるの？
これ見たら姉ちゃん死にたいなんて言わなくなると思った。
The film has taught you how to interpret sign language all up until this time by giving you context, then reveal. Yeah. That gives you enough practice to now, you don't have to know sign language to know what she's saying in this moment.
Yeah, or what she's feeling, what she's experiencing.
You've been handheld and taught how to interpret sign language enough so that you are released to interpret this moment on your own and you get it.
And given the chance that she's soaking wet, what are the chances that this happened just after one of those first scenes in the movie where Shoya was bullying her? It's like full circle.
Oh gosh, I hadn't considered that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the idea too. We didn't maybe touch on it really, but when her grandma is with her getting her hearing checked and you can tell that it's like there's nothing really we can do. Mm-hmm. And then later on, Shoyu says like, "Oh, I gave her those scars on her ear." It's like you can put two and two together. It's like, oh, the lasting impacts of bullying.
Yeah,
it's like this film is going to resolve in a beautiful, things are going to work out melancholy sort of way, but there's still the damage that's been done along the way.
Yep. And it's a thing where it's like, in a lot of ways, that's why I think people get stuck on this idea of I'm a terrible person, because they're thinking, I want to change the damage. I want to change the damage.
You can't sometimes.
No, so often you can't. And it becomes really like, if you continue to focus on I've got to fix the damage, you will inevitably see yourself as a terrible person because you're putting yourself in an impossible position. It's like, we can't worry so much about changing the things that have happened in the past. It has to be, when you have the recognition of the damage that you've caused, how will that change the way that you decide to move forward? I think when people are looking at, in relationships with other people, when they're like, I want an apology and I want you to mean it. What do they mean when they say, I want you to mean it? They mean, I want to observe and witness a change in you from this point forward.
I want to know the future is going to be different.
Yeah. An apology is way less about trying to make up and make things different than they were before, more so than it is making things different in the future. An apology is like a promise going forward, which then makes it interesting why he noticed before he fell, like, oh, I never apologized to her.
Yeah.
I never made that commitment to have things be different. I'm trying and I'm doing this, but
you're missing the one thing that really matters.
The only thing. Yeah, I'm sorry about this. I recognize why this was such a bad thing. Now this will contextualize all my behaviors going forward.
やだ、ちょっと切りすぎよ。
これくらいの方が可愛いわよ。あ、翔ちゃんお帰り。
お邪魔してます。
あ、いらっしゃいませ。
石田君。
はい。
ごめんなさい。
あ、いや、こちらこそ。
It's interesting how apologies are scattered throughout the entire back quarter of the film. And that's beautiful. Shoko's doing it at the very beginning, and it doesn't mean anything. But then by the end of the film, it's like everybody else were the people that needed to be the ones saying that I'm sorry.
Yeah, they were the ones who were supposed to.
And now at the very end of the film, everybody's realizing, like even Shoko's mom is saying it to Shoya's mom, but she's also saying it to Shoya himself.
Yeah.
He's saying it back to her. It's like,
all the apologies are happening that should have happened 5 years ago. There's an interesting additional totally side piece too, but you get a hint of it throughout the whole film again with Shoya's niece being a way darker skin tone. And now we finally see his brother-in-law.
こちらこそ。
そうよ。うちのは無敵だから。
お母さん、マリア、迎えに行ってくる。
はーい。誰？上の子の旦那。帰ってきたの。
The fact that his niece's name is Maria.
Yes.
A very non-Japanese name. The fact that his brother-in-law is black and is wearing a
army outfit,
like a camo outfit. The amount of American military bases in Japan is actually quite substantial.
Yeah.
I don't remember when you weren't with me when I was in this part of Japan. I got there before everybody else, but when I was driving around Mount Fuji area, like there was a radio station dedicated just to information for all of the American military members in English. Like a dedicated radio station for that.
Yeah.
And so everything in this context, or everything is kind of hinting towards context of him being American, him being a foreigner. And I think there's something really interesting about how this whole movie has talked about the differences, the judgment.
I know,
and then
exactly
it's like, hey,
where you're going with this.
Here's this little socio-cultural thing we're going to throw in, but like, hey, audience, everybody, that also applies to all of us and the people who we come across in the streets who might be like, they're different. Their skin tone is different. They're not from here. They're foreigners. They're gaijin. And it's like, maybe we should be treating everybody with the same kind of empathy and compassion as has been demonstrated in this film.
I love how I said it before. The more you pay attention, the more you're rewarded.
Yeah.
And I keep being surprised about how true of a statement that is. It's like this film keeps throwing stuff at you, and it all makes sense, and it's also perfectly woven together. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
また謝った。ま、それがあんたか。バーカ。バカ。バカ。
everybody else needed to learn how to empathize more, but Shoko needed to learn to grow a bit of a backbone and tell everybody else to screw off.
It's cool to see how there's something that I like to think about sometimes of like, you can't escape the impact of your environment. When you're in an environment where people do not empathize with one another, where things are difficult, it's hard not to be transformed by that. And I would almost say impossible not to be transformed by that. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, when you have a group of people who are interested and ready to change, who that's where they're oriented towards, even if you're kind of on the periphery of that group and maybe have a different perspective or a different way of doing things, if they're all consistent with what they're doing, it's hard not to be transformed.
Yeah.
Even if I'm going to insult somebody, I'm going to learn the way that they communicate in order to do so. Of like a little bit of a concession of, okay, I will at least try to reach out in this way.
Yeah, what a telling thing that she mocks her in a way that proves she actually took the time to learn.
Exactly.
みんなで一緒に文化祭見て回りたい。
It's so cool how at the very end, like once he lets his guard down and the walls come down, now all the emotion starts to flow for him too.
Yeah.
All those pent up, probably mixed feelings that he's had for so long finally have the opportunity to come out.
There's a catharsis that it's weird we both experience as the audience at the same time that he's experiencing it within the world of the film.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful too how the way that they chose to end the film was exactly the theme that's been carrying throughout the entire film, which is like connection through the faces that you see around you.
Yeah.
There's a concept within filmmaking about what is the very first thing you see and what is the very last thing that you see. And that tells you volumes about what the filmmaker wants to leave you with. This is where we're starting. This is where we're ending. And all that I'm seeing is we start the film with ripples, with the idea of the impact. You could have that as a metaphor for sound waves or for, there's also just like the impact that your decisions have reverberate outwards. And by the end of the film, it's like, it can be for positive or for negative. We see throughout the entire film that the impacts of people's decisions are both good or bad depending on the context. And by the end of the film, what happens is that the impact of decisions was the same thing that scarred and healed people.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
And so that's like maybe the reason that it's critical for you to learn how to empathize and understand other people, to reach out, to at least make the attempt, is that your actions are going to have a consequence one way or another. Are they going to hurt people? Are they going to heal people? The difference between those two comes down to your intention and your attitude towards trying to understand people who may be different than you and difficult to understand.
Every layer that we unpack, there's more going on under the surface.
Yep.
And it's not just consistent thematically. It's not just congruent with what we see in the world. It's not just a film about loneliness and connection when that's been no more desperate throughout the world than it is currently.
Yeah.
It's not just that it shows you wonderful three-dimensional characters. It's like it's doing all of that while at the same time tackling a really tough, really important topic and doing it in the most beautiful way I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's phenomenal.
It's also kind of astounding how many different themes it was able to juggle at the same time and how many times it said, we're not done yet. There's more to unpack here. It's the one movie I think that I desperately wish that everybody would watch because I think it would actually make a huge difference.
Yeah. Maybe we'd all learn to understand each other a little more. Ask the questions that we should have been asking the whole time.
Yeah.
On that note,
I
want to thank everybody for showing up and doing this whole thing with us. If you're still here, if you're still watching, you've been through this whole ringer with us and we appreciate you for being here.
Yeah. This might go on record as being the longest episode that we ever release.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I'm not sure how this is going to come out in editing, but for context and maybe a little bit behind the scenes here, we started filming at 1 p.m. and it is now currently 8:30 p.m.
This is a lot to dig into. Yeah.
7.5 hours.
Yep. If you guys are here and you're noticing anything in your own lives where you feel like you're struggling with things, or you see other people who are in your life who are struggling with stuff, we've left some resources in the description again, so you can reach out, get some support, get some help. But I think more than anything, part of coming away from this film is really teaching us, like, even if it feels scary, be there for the people who you know need that support and need that help. And if it's you, it's not just okay to reach out. It's like, it is human to reach out. It's not weak. It's not stupid. You're not good enough. It's like, we all need each other. So understand that your flaws, your vulnerabilities, it should not be something that separates you from people. It's something that we need to come and support each other with. And no matter what's happened, no matter what's been going on for you, to you, that is something that as a person you inherently deserve.
I think, too, it's also important to point out that it's important for you to reach out, but it's also not a guarantee that it's going to be received perfectly.
Yeah.
I think it's important to kind of remember that as much as we were on the side of Shoyo towards the middle of the film already, and he had the best of intentions, he still wasn't doing the best job at receiving Shoko's attempts for connection. So just because you're reaching out to somebody doesn't mean it's going to be received perfectly. And so I think it's important, on the one hand, that we look out for the people who are reaching out so that we can respond accordingly, but also have grace for the people who are not doing it perfectly when we make that attempt, and to have that ability to give a second chance and have that ability to say, hey, it's okay that it didn't happen exactly the way I wanted or needed, because relationships are messy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes multiple tries. Sometimes it takes trial and error. In this film, it took 6-7 years for that to come around full circle.
Yeah.
But it was worth it.
Well, we're probably going to have something a little bit lighter for you guys next time.
I hope so.
So we're really looking forward to you joining us for the next series, the next show, the next thing we explore. If you guys have any suggestions for things you want us to take a look at, explore, analyze in clearly far too much minute detail, but that's what we love to do, please leave us a comment, let us know, and we would love to explore that stuff with all of you.
Thanks so much for stopping by.
Take care. We'll see you.